I still remember the weight of that credit card in my hand as I signed the receipt. The fancy restaurant buzzed around me, but all I could hear was the echo of my son-in-law's words. We even cover the bill for the family beggars. My own daughter sat there silent as laughter rippled across the table. 40 years of calloused hands from honest work, and this was what I'd become in their eyes, a charity case. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. I never thought I'd be writing my own daughter out of my life. But sometimes the price of dignity is cutting away the very things that once gave your life meaning. My name is Richard Davis, and I've never been anything special, just a widower who fixed pipes for a living. After my wife Marie died, when our daughter Jessica was just 12, it was just the two of us against the world. I'd come home with my hands smelling of metal and solvent, my back aching from crawling under sinks all day, but I'd still muster the energy to help her with homework at our kitchen table, the same table where Marie used to serve Sunday dinners. "Dad, can I go to summer camp with Ashley?" Jessica asked me one evening when she was 14, sliding a glossy brochure across that worn table. The price tag made my stomach drop. 3 weeks of camp cost more than our monthly rent. "I'll see what I can do, Jessie," I told her, knowing I'd have to take on extra weekend jobs for the next 2 months. That was my life, calculating what luxuries I could provide by adding more hours to my workday. New school clothes, that's 3 extra service calls. Prom dress, 2 weeks of emergency calls, college tuition, years of saving every spare penny and working holidays when other dads were home with their families. "Your dad is coming to your graduation, right?" Jessica's roommate asked her during her community college graduation. I was standing just outside the door, flowers in hand. "Yeah," she said, her voice dropping slightly. He works with his hands. Doesn't have much education himself." I pretended not to hear, but those words stung. Still, I smiled through the ceremony, proud beyond words when she walked across that stage with her associate's degree in business administration. "I did it, Dad." She hugged me afterward, her eyes bright with accomplishment. "You sure did, kiddo. Your mom would have been so proud." My voice cracked a little saying it. Jessica got a job at a real estate office after graduation. That's where she met Brian Martinez, tall, charming, with perfectly white teeth and clothes that looked like they'd never seen a day of hard labor. The first time she brought him home to our modest 2-bedroom house, I watched his eyes scan our living room, taking in the worn furniture and the family photos in plastic frames. "So, Richard," he said, not calling me Mr. Davis like I might have expected. "Jessica tells me you're in maintenance?" "I'm a plumber," I said simply. "Have my own business, small as it is." "Honest work," he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I should have seen the warning signs then. The way Jessica tensed up when he commented on our neighborhood. How she quickly changed the subject when I mentioned memories from her childhood. But when you want your child to be happy, sometimes you choose not to see what's right in front of you. 6 months later, she showed me an engagement ring that must have cost more than my truck. "We're getting married, Dad," she squealed, throwing her arms around my neck. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, hugging her back while my mind raced with questions about how a junior real estate agent could afford such an extravagant ring. The wedding planning revealed a Jessica I barely recognized. Gone was my practical, down-to-earth daughter. In her place was someone obsessed with appearances, with having the right kind of wedding at the right kind of venue. "Dad, about the wedding," she began one evening, not quite meeting my eyes. "Brian's family is, well, they're connected to some important people. The guest list is getting complicated." "I can wear a suit, Jessie," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. "I clean up okay." She didn't laugh. "The thing is, Dad, Brian thinks it might be better if you watched online. We're doing a live stream for people who can't make it." The air left my lungs. "You don't want me at your wedding?" "It's not that I don't want you there," she rushed to explain. "It's just Brian's friends are from a different world. You wouldn't be comfortable." "I see." Two simple words that couldn't possibly convey the canyon that had just opened up in my chest. Please understand, Dad, it's not personal. But what could be more personal than being uninvited to your only child's wedding? So on a beautiful Saturday in June, I sat alone in my living room, watching my daughter get married on a computer screen. I'd still paid for half the wedding, emptied out my savings to do it, but apparently my money was welcome even if I wasn't. After the wedding, Jessica and Brian's visits became rare. When they needed help with the down payment on their fancy downtown apartment, though, I got a call. When Brian's car broke down, I was suddenly family again. Each time I helped without complaint. She was still my little girl, and I told myself that one day she'd remember who had always been there for her. Then came the invitation to dinner at La Maison, the kind of restaurant where you need reservations months in advance and where the menu doesn't list prices. Jessica called it a family dinner, and my heart lifted at the thought that maybe, just maybe, things were changing. I polished my dress shoes, the same ones I'd worn to Marie's funeral 15 years earlier. I ironed my best button-down shirt and even bought a new tie for the occasion. Looking in the mirror, I saw an aging man with work-weathered skin and grey hair, but I stood tall. Honest work had kept a roof over our heads and food on our table. There was no shame in that. The restaurant hostess looked me up and down when I arrived, her smile tightening just slightly. "Your party is already seated, Mr. Davis. Follow me, please." I walked past tables of well-dressed people laughing over wine glasses that probably cost more than what I charged for a day's work. At our table sat Brian and Jessica, along with 4 other couples. All friends of Brian's, from what I gathered. Everyone was dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine. "Dad, you made it!" Jessica stood to give me a quick hug, her perfume expensive and unfamiliar. "Richard, the man of the hour," Brian announced, raising his glass but not bothering to stand. "Everyone, this is Jessica's father. Not my father-in-law, just Jessica's father." A subtle distinction that spoke volumes. The evening progressed with conversation that deliberately excluded me. They talked about European vacations, investment portfolios, and people whose names I didn't recognize. Whenever I tried to join in, someone would quickly redirect the conversation. When the menus arrived, I felt a moment of panic seeing no prices listed. Jessica must have noticed. "Get whatever you want, Dad," she said, a flicker of the daughter I raised briefly visible. "It's our treat." "The filet is excellent," one of the women suggested, barely glancing my way. I nodded my thanks and kept examining the menu, trying to guess what might be the least expensive option. That's when Brian leaned over, his voice carrying just enough for everyone at the table to hear. "Don't worry about the prices, Richard. Here, we even cover the bill for the family beggars." The table erupted in laughter. I looked up, stunned, my face burning with humiliation. My eyes sought Jessica's, hoping, praying she would defend me. Instead, she offered an uncomfortable smile, her eyes darting away from mine. In that moment, something broke inside me. Not just my heart, but something deeper. The unwritten contract between parent and child that says, "I will always be your safe harbor, and you will never let others diminish me." The meal continued in a blur. I barely tasted the expensive steak, barely heard the conversations swirling around me. When dessert arrived, so did the check, placed directly in front of me by the waiter. "The bill is in your name, Mr. Davis," he said professionally. Brian's laugh cut through the table chatter. "Well, of course it is. He came to visit us after all. The least he can do is contribute something, right?" More laughter. More silence from my daughter. I looked at the total, nearly $1,000. Without a word, I pulled out my emergency credit card, the one I kept for things like car repairs or hospital visits, and handed it to the waiter. "Dad, Brian was just joking," Jessica finally spoke up, but her words came too late and with too little conviction. "It's fine," I said quietly, signing the receipt when the waiter returned. "Thank you for the invitation. Good night, everyone." I walked out of that restaurant with my back straight, even as my heart crumbled. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time since Marie died, I let myself cry while driving home. But sadness has a way of hardening into something else if you give it enough time. The next morning, I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder labeled Jessica. Inside were records of every financial contribution I'd made to my daughter and her husband over the years. The $30,000 for their wedding, the $25,000 toward their apartment down payment, the $12,000 loan when Brian's credit cards were maxed out, the co-signed loan for his BMW when his credit score was too low to qualify on his own. I'd never asked for repayment, never even mentioned these contributions again after making them. But now, sitting at my kitchen table with these papers spread out before me, I realized I'd been enabling the very people who had humiliated me. For 3 days, I barely slept. I kept replaying that dinner in my mind, hearing Brian's words, seeing Jessica's silence. On the 4th day, I made 2 phone calls, one to a lawyer friend who had helped me set up my plumbing business years ago, and another to a printing shop downtown. "I need your help with something, Joe," I told my lawyer friend, "and it might get messy." Joe listened as I laid out what had happened and what I wanted to do. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Are you sure about this, Rich? It's going to change everything between you and Jessica." "Everything's already changed," I replied. "I'm just finally acknowledging it." The next week was a blur of activity. Joe helped me draft a formal letter of demand for all the loans I'd made to Brian and Jessica over the years, with interest calculated at standard market rates. At the printing shop, I made copies of all my records, bank statements, check images, text messages asking for money, and thank you notes promising repayment someday. I also wrote a personal letter which began, "To those who dined with us at La Maison last Friday evening, you may know me as Jessica's father, or as my son-in-law Brian Martinez so eloquently put it, one of the family beggars. What you may not know is who I really am, what I've done for my daughter, and how your laughter at my expense revealed more about your character than mine. Allow me to introduce myself properly." I went on to explain my life as a widower and single father, the sacrifices I'd made for Jessica's education and well-being, and the financial support I'd provided to her and Brian throughout their relationship. I detailed the dinner incident without embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves. I concluded by explaining that I would now be seeking formal repayment of all loans through legal channels. I mailed these packets to everyone who had been at that dinner table. I also sent copies to Brian's boss at the real estate firm, to his parents, and to several of the business associates whose names I'd heard mentioned during dinner conversation. Then I waited. The first call came 3 days later, from Jessica, her voice shrill with panic. "Dad, what have you done? Brian is furious. His boss called him into the office and people are talking." "I simply told the truth, Jessica," I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Isn't that what you taught me honesty was? These were private family matters. You had no right—" "Family," I interrupted. "Was I family when you uninvited me from your wedding? Was I family when you sat silent while your husband called me a beggar?" She started crying then, but for the first time in my life, my daughter's tears didn't move me to comfort her. "Brian says his reputation is ruined. He's talking about suing you for defamation. Everything I wrote is documented and true. Let him try." Over the next few weeks, the repercussions spread like ripples in a pond. 2 of Brian's business partners quietly dissolved their arrangement with him. His parents called me, horrified by what their son had done, offering apologies I hadn't expected. One of the dinner guests, a woman who'd barely looked at me that night, sent a handwritten note of apology along with a check for her portion of the dinner I'd paid for. Meanwhile, my lawyer friend filed formal collection proceedings for the loans. When reporters from the local business journal caught wind of the story, a humble plumber taking on a flashy real estate agent who'd been living beyond his means, they called for comments. I declined, but apparently others were willing to talk. The article, when it appeared, painted Brian as a fraud who had been misrepresenting his success while secretly borrowing money from his father-in-law. It mentioned rumors of other questionable business practices that were now being investigated. 3 months after that fateful dinner, Jessica showed up at my door alone. She looked different, thinner, with no makeup, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of the designer clothes I'd grown accustomed to seeing her in. "Can I come in, Dad?" Her voice was small, reminding me of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after skinning her knee. I stepped aside without a word. She walked into our old living room and stood there awkwardly like a stranger. "Brian and I are getting divorced," she said finally. "Everything's falling apart. His business is under investigation. We've had to sell the apartment and—" Her voice broke. "And I've lost my dad." I remained standing, my arms crossed over my chest. "You lost me long before that dinner, Jessica. You lost me when you decided I wasn't good enough to be seen at your wedding. You lost me when you chose silence over defending your father." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing in earnest now. I know, and I'm so sorry. I got caught up in Brian's world, the money, the status, all of it. I forgot who I was, who you raised me to be. I wanted to hold firm, to keep my walls up, but seeing my child in pain still cut through my defenses. I sat beside her, not touching her yet, but close. I left him, Dad. I packed my things and left. The apartment is being foreclosed on anyway. I've been staying with a friend from my old job, but she looked up at me with swollen eyes. I don't know what to do now. Everything's gone. Not everything, I said finally. You still have your education, your health, your ability to work. And do I still have you? She whispered. That question hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of betrayal and the possibility of forgiveness. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. That depends on what you do next. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. I'm willing to help you start over, Jessica. Not with Brian, not in that fake life you've been living. I'll pay for 3 months of rent in a new place, somewhere modest, in a different neighborhood. I'll help you find a job using your business degree. But you have to rebuild your life from the ground up, with honest work and realistic expectations. You'd do that for me? After everything? I'm your father. That never changed, even when you wished it had. She reached for my hand then, and I let her take it. Her fingers felt cold and fragile in mine. Brian says you ruined his life, she said quietly. He lost everything because of your letters. I shook my head slowly. Brian ruined his own life by living a lie and treating people with contempt. My letters just exposed what was already there. Jessica stayed for dinner that night. Nothing fancy, just the meatloaf and mashed potatoes I'd planned for myself. We talked more than we had in years. Real talk, not the superficial conversations we'd been having. She told me how Brian had gradually changed her, convinced her that her background was something to be ashamed of rather than proud of. How she'd started to believe that worth was measured by price tags and postcodes rather than character and actions. I don't even recognize myself anymore, she admitted as we washed dishes side by side, just like we used to when she was young. I look in the mirror and see someone I don't like very much. The good news, I told her, handing her a plate to dry, is that you get to decide who you want to be tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Jessica moved into a small one-bedroom apartment the following week. She found a job as an administrative assistant at a local community center. Nothing glamorous, but honest work with decent people. I helped her move in, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs because the building had no elevator. It's not much, she said, looking around at the bare walls and basic furniture. It's yours, I replied. Earned with your own hard work. That means something. Rebuilding our relationship took time. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. But slowly, meal by meal, conversation by conversation, we found our way back to each other. Not as we had been, that was gone forever, but as something new, something more honest. A year after the dinner at La Maison, I received a letter from Brian. His once flourishing real estate business had collapsed amid investigations into fraudulent practices. He was working as a delivery driver now, living in a studio apartment, not unlike the one Jessica had started over in. "I hope you're satisfied with what you've done to me," he wrote. "You've destroyed everything I built." I wrote back a simple response. "What is built on lies will always collapse eventually. I just hastened the inevitable. I wish you well in building something more solid this time around." Jessica read the exchange when she came over for our weekly dinner. "Do you think he'll ever understand?" she asked. I shrugged. "Some people never do, but that's not our problem anymore." She nodded, thoughtful. "You know what I've learned this past year, Dad? Dignity isn't about what you have. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you something." "That's a lesson worth learning," I agreed, "though I wish it hadn't come with such a high price tag for both of us." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Some lessons are expensive, but not learning them costs even more." As we sat there in my humble kitchen, eating pot roast off the same plates we'd used when she was a child, I realized something important. We had both paid a high price for this wisdom. But unlike the $1,000 dinner that had started it all, this was a cost that had actually bought us something valuable, the truth about who we were and what really mattered. In the end, I didn't lose my daughter. I found her again, the real Jessica, not the hollow reflection who had sat silent at that fancy restaurant table. And she found herself too, beneath the layers of pretense and social climbing that had nearly buried the person I'd raised her to be. Sometimes, standing up for your dignity means losing something you thought you couldn't live without. But in that loss, you might just find something you'd forgotten you had. Your self-respect, your truth, and maybe, if you're lucky, a more authentic version of what you thought you'd lost. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up for your dignity, even when it cost you something important? To hear the next story, just click on the box on the screen. Thank you so much for listening.